So when we talk about Dollars for Doers, which is a part of many companies' non-working hours employer-supported volunteering programs, when a company reports on the total hours that employees have volunteered in the community, should hours matched through Dollars for Doers always be included in that number? Or are there, do they count at all because it's really employee initiative? I mean, employer-supported volunteering tends to typically be, I'm helping you, I'm organizing it for you, I'm buying you a t-shirt, I'm creating a relationship with the community partner. That does not typically apply within a Dollars for Doers context. So just general feedback is, should Dollars for Doers, when we talk about, the total number of volunteer hours that collectively was reported by LBG Canada companies last year is a phenomenal number. It's 1.4 million or something along those lines. But the question is, do we include Dollars for Doers as part of the employer bucket, or is that in a separate bucket?
What do you mean by Go ahead.
Thank you. Could I just ask, with the Dollars with Doers, when you say matching, are you saying that, for example, for every hour someone volunteers, the company donates some amount of money to the charity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry, I should have explained that, but yes, that's exactly what we're saying.
Okay.
I'm going to say, if you go back to the principles in terms of why you have those programs and why we're including those hours, it's really about engaging employees and building pride. And especially, some of the systems and programs that people have, it's important to share that information. And if we can't, among our employees in terms of what they're doing outside of work, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't include it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's a question that whether the company is double reporting. Like, are you asking, so they're reporting the hours?
Yep.
And reporting the financial donation. So is the essence of the question, by doing that, they're potentially like double reporting?
No, it's more because companies would always count the dollars that they have invested in that employee engagement strategy. Right. But some companies feel strongly that actually they didn't organize that volunteering initiative, so the hours, they wouldn't claim those hours as part of their overall reporting on the total number of hours that their employees volunteered.
But their employees are still doing that in the community.
Oh, and it's very interesting. So we're just trying to, we first of all, we would never criticize somebody for, we would cajole, we would inform, we would suggest if somebody was under-reporting, but we would never be as concerned about under-reporting except for strategic internal reasons as we would be somebody that we knew was actually going out to report externally and was over-reporting, right? So traditionally, we've always been very concerned about the risk of over-reporting because that's a reputational risk. But it's just become obvious to us that some companies are choosing not to include their Dollars for Doers hours in their total non-working hours number because they don't feel as an employer they really have anything to do with the initiative taken by the employee. And it's fascinating, which is why I really I'm really eager to hear what your responses are, because it's
If that's their argument, I would argue by having the program, they're encouraging and incenting their employees to volunteer. They're creating an environment to make that happen.
Well, the debate can say, like, I understand during working hours, obviously that's a cost to the company, but after, like, mostly, I think if you ask most of the employees who do this, they don't volunteer to get the contribution. They volunteer, and the contribution is almost an also-ran. It's an employee, like, they feel like it's a bit of a perk that's added on, but I wouldn't know of any employee who would volunteer more because of a Dollars for Doers program. And I think if we asked our employees that would be fairly consistent.
I would
agree with that. Yeah.
But isn't the category is volunteering outside of work hours. So if you're trying to capture not like volunteering during non-work hours, it's the same thing whether you incent it or not.
I have difficulty getting on side with reporting non-working hours, only because I feel that people will continue to do this initiative regardless of whether or not the company actually is supporting it. So if we were to do, for example, MS doesn't actually have a Dollar for Doers program, but I can tell you there's a lot of activity that's happening outside of working hours from the organization in terms of the staff. And I have a hard time getting on side with just because you work at a company and you also volunteer out in the community outside of work, it should then be counted as a benefit to the company to be able to report that.
The way, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The way we think of it is I agree that Dollars for Doers does not incent people to take action on volunteering. I think it incents reporting. And so we know in our organization there are so many people who are doing so much volunteer work that is not reported to us. And that's for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's a lack of awareness, but for some people, and I know because I've asked them directly, it's that their volunteer work is very personal to them. It's not something that they want shared. They don't want recognition. They don't want acknowledgement. So that we actually do report on non-working hours, but it's just the stuff that's reported to us, because the way we kind of think of it, it's like an implicit acknowledgement that, hey, like, this is what I did and I want to share it with you, my employees. So if they're not tracking it, if they don't want it reported, then we don't report on it. But everything that's shared with us is reported on, because we take that as like an acknowledgement that they want to share that information with us, because there's no requirement that necessitates that they provide that information to us.
I'm just going to throw out one other thing that can add to this, and we haven't reported it. It's a program that's just started this year, so this past fiscal, so it'll be reported to, and you'll probably have to listen to it at one of these meetings. We have a program that is not Dollars for Doers. What we believe is our volunteers, when they volunteer in the community, what they actually need more of is time. So we give them a day off with pay for an X amount of hours of volunteer work. And I actually will be submitting that with a question mark as that day off with pay for their volunteer role, because they have to volunteer 40 hours to get that. And I'm wondering how that can be shown as a contribution.
Sorry, I believe that wouldn't that be considered during work hours then, volunteering, if you're actually being able to pay for that employee to be away?
No, where they actually get a day off. It's not about going to volunteer during that period. If they volunteer after work hours for 40 hours, instead of getting a Dollars for Doers or instead of getting an incentive or a T-shirt, we give them a day off with pay. So they get 7 hours for their 40 hours of work.
So that will be a very interesting discussion, and I'm
glad.
I
know it's not this one, but I'm saying what decision is made on this one will certainly impact my reporting for next year.
Well, there's a couple. Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, you know what? I ran this by because obviously she runs our employee engagement programs, and her comment, and I'm going to read it. I would recommend keeping dollars for doer hours out of non-working hours reporting. That to me is the company taking credit for hours of volunteering that didn't facilitate or initiate, and they should only take credit for the dollar that is donated as a grant. I share that sentiment, but if they do approve, we're in the minority. It isn't a big deal, but it will then change how we report LBG next year. Volunteer grant hours plus CSV hours versus just CSV hours. So those were her comments. So I agree with her. Frankly, I agree with her. So.
Okay. So, to be honest, and this is probably one of the reasons why so many companies are looking at their Dollars for Doers programs and saying, okay, is this the right fit for us? Which is, you know, we've had some really interesting discussions in webinar format. I'm going to take this away and percolate on it and send you back a summary of this particular issue, because I do think there's a couple of interesting points that have been made. One is, you know, the whole notion of employer supported versus employer supported. So employer supported in a very broad sense is, hey, I support your initiative and therefore I'm going to acknowledge it by donating to your charity of choice, versus employer supported, which is volunteering that's either organized, paid for, t-shirts, paint, whatever it is, by the employer itself, even though it happens during non-working hours. So, you know, I think some of the conversation is linked to the fact that actually the definition of employer-supported volunteering does not exist. So that's one of the things that we're working on in the background, particularly around our Impact 2030 stuff. But those are two issues. I think the other really interesting point that was made, there's a couple of them, but you know, if the employee chooses to report in what they have done, is that not an indication of the fact that they are at least partially motivated to get acknowledged, like to link their time to their charity of choice? So there is that notion of not requiring it, but when employees choose to do it, is that worth the acknowledgement that they're saying, hey, employer, I appreciate your support, which means that it might not be the whole reason, but it might be a factor. It could be a feel-good factor. So that's another question that might need to be asked. But I do think that one of the things that we probably need to do is to lay out options, because as I said, we never would criticize a company for underreporting unless we thought they were at risk of hiding their light under a bushel, or not being able to respond strategically to a good question that somebody's asking them. But I think what we might want to do is to share across the group how everyone else is doing it, so that companies can at least choose how they want to report based on reporting trends that we see within the group. Does that make sense? So it should remain a choice of the company, because the choice of the company will reflect the corporate culture, and it would also, I mean, there are some companies that when you ask the perceived priority of Dollars for Doers, they put a 9 out of 10, right? And there are other companies that say it's a 2 out of 10. So the 2 out of 10 company tends to have less participation and probably is more likely not to include the numbers. The 9 out of 10 company probably has much higher participation, has a communication strategy and a budget to actually mobilize people to take advantage of it. So this has been a very useful discussion, because I think what we probably need to do is to map out some of the factors so that everyone across the group can understand what people are doing and make the right choice based on A, their corporate culture, B, the priority of the program within the context of that culture, and C, how they see their peers reporting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's definitely to ask a question. So in this situation, if there's no dollars for doers, but employees, because of the culture, are encouraged to volunteer and be engaged in the community, but it's on their own and they report back the hours, should those not be included at all?
So I think that they certainly can be included when the employee is really given credit for their initiative, because this is an amazing question, and in the context of our Impact 2030 work, and I'm involved in the measurement committee and trying to figure out how to measure impact. It's fascinating, and so there is a huge conversation to be had, because some people would argue 100% that the corporate culture engenders volunteering and a spirit of community, and people go and act in that spirit because they see it reflected in their workplace. And so the corporation might not be matching the time, but they still might be celebrating and recognition and recognizing the impact that their employees are, of their own initiative, having on the community. So there are companies where people actually say, hey, we should go and do this, and they go and do it, and the company says, that's amazing, let's do more of this, but they're not matching it. And so there is an argument out there that yes, those hours should count, because it's directly linked to the corporate culture. But I have to say that one of the most interesting things about the Impact 2030 work that we've been involved in is that there really is no list of definitions about what volunteering is, and even if all of the terms and definitions don't apply to every program, there is no agreement that exists in terms of what volunteering is. There's lots of different, and so we're trying to pull all of those examples together so people can say, okay, well, this is the biggest bouquet of volunteering opportunities I could possibly include, and then these are the ones I'm going to choose for me, and these are the ones I'm going to report on.
Well, I think those are really important questions, because the last example you described, to create that culture, there's a huge investment to doing that. And if we don't get credit, then why, other than for, the good work that you're doing and engaged workforce, why would companies invest in doing that?
Well, and also too, if the employee acts and it's not acknowledged or encouraged or whatever, then they won't do it again, right? So the fact that it could be a repeated number of hours that is reported year after year after year does indicate that there's something about that corporate culture that is enabling that volunteering to happen.